All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something, well, you probably use it almost every day.
Yeah.
Notebooks.
Uh-huh.
We're not just talking about, picking one up at the store. We're going deeper. We're looking at the materials.
Yes.
And you sent over some really fascinating stuff about this. Custom notebook materials. Who knew it was so complex?
It really is. I
Yeah,
mean, you might think just grabbing a notebook off the shelf is, a simple choice, but there's a lot more to it. And
right.
all these choices about the materials, they actually make a huge difference in how you experience the notebook, even what it says about a brand, if it's a branded notebook.
It's like there's a whole philosophy behind it almost.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of guides to this philosophy, we've got the Lion Paper Guide to help us navigate this world.
That's right.
This is amazing. It's not just like a product catalog. This thing really digs into how choosing the right materials, like everything, the paper, the cover,
Everything.
it reflects a brand's values, their commitment to sustainability, like all these things that, honestly, as a consumer, I really appreciate.
Absolutely. The Lion Paper Guide does a great job of showing how these little, seemingly small choices about materials, they all add up to create that final product.
And we're going to break it all down. Like, what are the different types of paper and why do they matter? What about the covers? So many options.
Yeah, there are.
How does the binding affect how you use it?
Huge.
And of course, we can't ignore sustainability these days.
So important.
And then all the ways you can customize it. It's really about, like you said, appreciating that even something as simple as a notebook, there's so much thought that goes into it.
There really is.
Okay, let's start at the heart of the notebook. The paper.
Okay.
It's easy to just like flip past that and not think about it.
Totally.
But honestly, the paper, it sets the tone for your whole experience, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Just think about how different it feels when you're writing on different types of surfaces. So the Lion Paper Guide talks a lot about this, like paper weight and thickness. That's measured in grasm. For most everyday stuff, like jotting down notes, to-do lists, you're usually good with something between like 100 to 120 grasm.
Okay.
It's, substantial enough to write comfortably, but not so thick that it makes your notebook bulky.
Now, I know you're a bit of a pen enthusiast.
I do love a good pen.
So if you're using like a really nice fountain pen, you need a paper that can handle that.
Oh, absolutely. You need something that can handle that richer ink. And there's this great example in the guide. Lion Paper worked with this U.S. stationery brand that's all about that luxury writing experience, right? And they recommended this premium 160 grams cream paper.
Wow, that sounds fancy.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the thickness. That extra weight, it feels more luxurious in your hand, but it also, really importantly, reduces ink bleed through.
I hate when that happens.
Oh yeah, that ghosting on the other side of the page, it's gone. It makes writing so much more enjoyable.
It's all in the details, right?
Exactly.
And it's not just about the thickness, there's the texture too, like how the paper feels under your pen.
Oh yeah, that's huge. You've got your satin finishes, which are super smooth. Your pen just glides across the page.
I love that feeling.
Right. And then you've got laid finishes. They've got this like slightly ribbed texture. It's more tactile. The guide says it's great for sketching because you get that feedback from the paper, gives you more control.
It's almost like, is it because of how the fibers are pressed or something that gives you that texture?
Yeah, I think so. That's what creates that distinct feel that artists like for sketching.
Makes sense. So we've got different weights, different textures. What about ink absorption? Like for someone who's maybe a little messy or a little impatient,
So smudging's a concern.
I might have that problem.
Well, then ink absorption and drying time are key.
Makes sense.
The Lion Paper Guide really stresses that. A paper that absorbs ink well and dries quickly, it's perfect, especially if you like gel pens or fountain pens. It minimizes smudges, keeps your notes looking nice and clean.
Professional.
Exactly.
So we've got all these different weights, textures. What about the types of paper themselves? Like what are the options mentioned in the guide?
Well, you've got your standard uncoated paper, your everyday kind of paper. Then more and more these days, there are recycled and eco-friendly options.
I like that.
Yeah, and the guide says using these can cut down environmental impact by up to 30%.
That's significant.
It is. So if you're someone who prioritizes sustainability, that's something to consider. And then there's the premium papers, like that green paper we were talking about, the fountain pen friendly one. Those are all about that high quality feel.
It's like choosing the right paper can really elevate the whole notebook experience.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the first thing you see and feel, the cover.
Yeah, the cover is important.
And the Lion Paper Guide really emphasizes that it makes a big first impression.
It does. It's like the handshake of the notebook, your
Oh,
first
right.
interaction with it.
Hmm?
And it says a lot about the product, the brand, if there is one.
Right.
And the guide goes into all these different materials you can use, each with its own unique feel and message.
Okay, let's talk about some classics first. Leather and vegan leather.
Yeah, those are popular choices.
What are the things people should consider when choosing between those two?
Well, leather has always been, associated with luxury. It's durable, it's timeless.
A classic feel.
Right. But now, with more people caring about ethical sourcing, vegan leather's become a really popular alternative.
I see that a lot now.
Yeah. And there's this cool example in the guide. Lion Paper created vegan leather covers from recycled materials for this eco-conscious brand. And it's smart because it aligns with the brand's values and it appeals to customers who are, environmentally conscious.
It's interesting, right? Because it's almost like, is that shift toward recycled vegan leather
Hmm.
also kind of driven by maybe a preference for a more like understated aesthetic or maybe a more modern aesthetic?
I think you're right. It's definitely tapping into something.
Yeah. What about some other cover materials that the guide highlights?
Let's see. There's soft touch laminated paper. It's super smooth, almost velvety,
Oh, I like that.
very high-end look and feel. Then you've got linen or other fabric covers. Those are really premium, very tactile. You just want to hold them.
They feel good.
And then for something more eco-conscious, maybe with a bit more of a rustic vibe, there's craft and recycled cardboard covers. Those send a strong sustainability message.
Yeah, it's like choosing a craft cardboard cover is sending a very different message to the customer than, say, a sleek, soft-touch laminate.
Exactly. It immediately tells you something about the brand's values and what they think their customers care about.
And it all comes back to that idea of telling a story through the materials.
It does.
All right, now let's move on to how it all comes together, literally. The binding. And the Lion Paper Guide mentions that how a notebook is bound really affects how long it lasts and how usable it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to think about how you're actually going to use the notebook. If you need to lay it flat, like for drawing or taking notes across 2 pages, then the binding's super important.
Right.
And the guide says spiral or coil binding is the way to go for that. They even give an example of lion paper, using that for a client who makes notebooks for artists.
Yeah, that makes sense. You need that unrestricted surface.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about some other binding types? I mean, what else is out there?
Yeah, what are the common ones?
Well, there's perfect binding. That's your typical paperback book kind of binding. It's cost-effective, good for general use.
Okay.
And then there's sewn binding. The guide says that's the most durable option. If you're going to use a notebook a lot for a long time, sewn binding is the way to go.
Like a journal, for example.
Exactly. If you want a journal to last, sewn binding is probably the best choice.
It really is about matching the binding to how the person is going to use the notebook, right? How long they need it to last.
Right.
Now, we can't really talk about materials these days without talking about sustainability.
No, we can't.
And the Lion Paper Guide even quotes the statistic that 73% of consumers are willing to pay more for sustainable products.
Yeah, that's a big number. It shows how important eco-conscious materials are becoming for consumers.
It's like people are really paying attention to the impact of their choices.
Definitely. And a notebook might seem small, but it's still part of that.
Absolutely. So what are some of those eco-friendly materials that the guide highlights?
Well, there are some really interesting options. Covers made from bamboo or cork. Those are renewable and they look great.
Yeah, they've got that natural look.
Right. Recycled paper's a big one, obviously. Reduces waste, and it can even have a unique texture and look.
Oh yeah, I like recycled paper.
Then there's FSC certified paper. Yeah. That certification means the paper comes from responsibly managed forests, which is good to know.
So you know it's sourced ethically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the guide actually mentions how a Lion Paper used FSC certified paper and biodegradable inks for this major retailer's planner line.
Oh, wow. So they really went all in on sustainability.
They did. And it makes sense, when you think about it, if consumers are saying they're willing to pay more for sustainable products, it just makes sense for companies to offer those options.
It's meeting that demand.
Exactly.
And those biodegradable inks and adhesives, that just takes it a step further.
Right. It's like they're thinking about the whole life cycle of the product, not just the main materials.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, it really is. And it kind of brings up the question, for brands and for consumers, how can we integrate these sustainable options in a way that's like authentic and effective?
Right. It's got to be done right.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's move on to making a notebook truly unique. customization and branding.
Yeah, that's where it gets really fun.
And the Lion Paper Guide really emphasizes how important that is for making a product stand out.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, there are so many choices out there. Customization is how a product or a brand can create something truly unique.
Take finding that perfect fit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the materials you choose play a big role in that.
The guide mentions leather being good for debossing. Can you explain that a little?
Sure. So debossing is basically pressing a design into the material, creating an indentation, like a stamp.
Okay.
Leather's great for that because it's pliable, it takes the impression well, and it creates this really elegant, long-lasting effect. You can actually feel the design.
It adds that tactile element.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you see that a lot with like company logos or even just, personalized initials or something.
Very nice. What about some other materials and what kind of customization works well with them?
Well, coated papers, like the ones with the soft touch laminate, they're great for foil stamping.
Oh, yeah, that shiny effect.
Exactly. It's where you apply metallic or colored foil using heat and pressure. The guide actually gives an example of Lion Paper working with a tech startup, using those soft touch covers and foil stamping their logo.
That's cool. It fits that sleek, modern tech image.
Right. It's all about like choosing the right materials and techniques to reinforce the brand's identity.
So if you're thinking about a custom notebook, whether it's for yourself or your brand or as a gift, you really need to think about the material choices from the get-go.
Absolutely. The material and the customization have to work together.
It's all connected.
It is. And the guide even talks about how certain materials naturally fit with certain brands, like natural fibers for an outdoorsy brand versus something more sleek and modern for a tech company.
It's like you can almost tell a story about a brand just by the materials they choose for their notebook.
Exactly. It's all part of that brand storytelling.
Wow. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that choosing materials for a custom notebook, it's way more than just picking something random.
Oh yeah, it's so much more.
It affects everything. How well the notebook works, how long it lasts, how it looks, what it says about the brand,
Absolutely.
and of course, how sustainable it is.
All of that.
It's really amazing to see how all those little decisions about materials come together to create something that honestly can really speak to you on different levels.
It is. And the Lion Paper Guide does a great job of showing how those choices can make something as simple as a notebook into something really special.
It's all about thinking beyond just the basic function.
Right. It's about expression, about values.
So, thinking about all these choices, what does your ideal notebook say about you, or what message are you trying to send?
It's a good question. What about you? What's your ideal notebook?
I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah, it's worth considering.
It really is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of notebook materials.
It was my pleasure.
It's been fascinating. And we'll see you next time on the deep dive.
See you then.
Bye.